The neon glow of the gas station flickered against the midnight sky as Jake pulled his battered sedan into the empty lot. He exhaled heavily, rubbing his tired eyes. It had been a long shift, and all he wanted was a strong coffee to push through the last few hours before heading home. The moment he stepped out of the car, he heard a soft whimper. Jake turned toward the sound, frowning. The lot was nearly deserted. Just his car, a few moths dancing around the flickering lights, and the shadow of the cashier visible through the station's glass window. Then he felt it. A small presence brushing against his leg. He looked down. A tiny golden retriever puppy sat at his feet, its fur slightly damp and matted with dirt. Its large, soulful eyes locked onto his, as if pleading. The little creature shivered, but it made no move to run. "Where did you come from?" Jake murmured, crouching down. He reached out hesitantly, and the puppy immediately nuzzled its head against his palm, warm and desperate for comfort. No collar. No tag. The puppy gave a soft whine, then, without warning, bolted past him and leaped straight into his car. Jake blinked, stunned. "Hey, wait!" He hurried after it, leaning into the car's interior. The puppy had settled into the passenger seat, curling into a tight ball as if it had always belonged there. When Jake reached out, it didn't shrink away. Instead, it looked up at him, eyes filled with something unsettlingly close to purpose. "Come on, buddy," Jake sighed. "I can't keep you." He reached for the small bundle of fur. The moment his hands touched the puppy, it let out a sharp, frantic bark and twisted away, pushing itself deeper into the seat. Jake froze. There was something wrong about the way it moved. Not out of fear, not out of stubbornness, more like it was trying to tell him something. Then he heard it. A sound. Faint but unmistakable. A dull thud from beneath his seat. Jake's breath caught. The gas station was silent except for the occasional hum of distant traffic, but he knew what he had heard. Something had shifted under his seat. He slowly straightened, eyes flicking around the parking lot. No one else was there. Just the indifferent glow of the station lights and the distant silhouette of the cashier wiping down the counter. He turned back to the car, pulse quickening. The puppy remained in the seat, its small chest rising and falling rapidly, ears perked as if listening. Something was under there. Jake swallowed, then cautiously knelt down, reaching a hand beneath the driver's seat. His fingers brushed against something cold. Smooth. Metal. His stomach tightened. He grasped the object and pulled it out. An old key. It was larger than a normal car key, rusted around the edges, attached to a worn leather tag with barely legible engraving. Jake squinted in the dim light, trying to make out the markings. There was a name, or at least part of one, and beneath it a date. 20 years ago. Jake's grip tightened around the key. The puppy let out a soft, urgent whimper. A cold breeze swept through the empty lot. Suddenly, the night didn't feel as still anymore. Jake turned the key over in his palm, his pulse quickening. The worn leather tag bore the faint imprint of a name, but time had eroded most of the lettering. The only thing that remained legible was the date, 20 years ago. The puppy, still curled in the passenger seat, let out a soft, urgent whimper. It nudged the air with its nose, eyes flicking between Jake and the key as if trying to tell him something. Jake swallowed hard. He wasn't the kind of guy to chase mysteries. He had enough problems of his own, a job that barely paid the bills, an apartment with a leaky ceiling, and an old car that threatened to die on him at any moment. This wasn't his problem. And yet, something about the puppy's determination, the way it had led him straight to the key, gnawed at him. He glanced around the gas station lot. Still empty. A rational voice in his head told him to put the key back, to walk away. Instead, he slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. The puppy wagged its tail, as if it had been waiting for him to make that decision. Jake turned the key over one last time before setting it on the dashboard. He had no idea what it belonged to, or why a puppy had practically thrown itself into his car to show him, but there was only one way to find out. He shifted into drive and pulled out of the gas station, the neon lights disappearing in his rearview mirror. Back in his apartment, the key sat on the coffee table, gleaming under the yellow glow of a flickering lamp. The puppy had already made itself at home, curled up on an old blanket near the couch, eyes heavy with sleep. Jake leaned forward, staring at the leather tag. He traced a finger over the faded letters, trying to make sense of them. He needed more light. Pulling out his phone, he snapped a picture and adjusted the contrast. The letters sharpened slightly. M-O-S-E-R. Moser? A name? A place? Jake frowned. It didn't ring any bells. He copied the text into a search engine. A list of results popped up, but most were irrelevant: businesses, old obituaries, a handful of scattered articles. Then something caught his eye. A missing persons report. His breath hitched. He clicked the link, and an old news article loaded. The headline sent a chill through him. Boy vanishes without a trace, last seen near gas station. Jake's eyes darted to the date. It matched the one on the key. He read on, his fingers tightening around the phone. The boy's name was Daniel Moser. He had disappeared 20 years ago on a cold October night. Witnesses claimed to have seen him near a gas station, possibly getting into a car. No body was ever found. No leads. No answers. Until now. Jake's gaze flickered to the puppy. It slept soundly, chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. A sick feeling curled in his stomach. Had the dog led him to this? Had it been waiting for someone to find that key? The rational part of him screamed that it was a coincidence. Just a stray puppy and a rusted key lost beneath the seat. But another part of him, the part that felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on his chest, told him there was something more. And if that was true, then this wasn't just a key. It was a question. One that had gone unanswered for 20 years. Jake exhaled sharply and ran a hand down his face. He knew himself well enough to admit that he wouldn't be able to let this go. He picked up his phone and searched again, this time for addresses connected to the Moser name. A single result stood out. An abandoned house 20 miles outside town. The last known residence of Daniel Moser's family. Jake looked at the puppy. Its tail twitched slightly in sleep, as if dreaming. He had no idea why, but he was certain of one thing. This little dog had found him for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it was waiting for him at that house. The road leading to the Moser house was in worse condition than Jake expected. Cracks snaked through the pavement, weeds pushed through gaps, and the occasional rusted road sign leaned precariously, long forgotten. The place had the eerie silence of abandonment, no streetlights, no passing cars. Just his own headlights cutting through the darkness. The puppy sat upright in the passenger seat, unusually alert. Its ears twitched, nose pressed against the window as if it recognized the route. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. Something about this felt wrong. The house finally came into view, a hulking structure, its edges softened by time and neglect. Peeling paint curled away from wooden walls, and the windows gaped like hollow eyes. A no trespassing sign hung crookedly on a rusted gate, more of a suggestion than a warning. Jake swallowed hard. For 20 years, this house had held secret. And now, for some reason, he had been brought here. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was thick, almost oppressive. He turned to the puppy. "You wanted me here," he muttered. "So now what?" The dog wagged its tail once but didn't move. Jake exhaled and grabbed the key from his pocket. It felt heavier than before, as if it carried the weight of the past. One last glance at the road behind him, empty. Then he pushed open the car door. The night air carried the scent of damp earth and rotting wood. Grass brushed his ankles as he approached the front porch, each step slow and deliberate. The wooden boards groaned under his weight, protesting his presence. Then a noise. A faint scraping sound coming from inside. Jake froze. His pulse hammered against his ribs. Forcing himself forward, he pressed a hand against the front door. It gave way easily, swinging open with a long, aching creak. Dust swirled in the air, illuminated by the sliver of moonlight cutting through the broken windows. Inside, the house was a time capsule, faded wallpaper peeling in long strips, furniture draped in thick sheets, the lingering scent of something long decayed. Then the puppy moved. It leaped from the porch and padded straight inside, nose to the floor, sniffing with purpose. "Hey, wait!" Jake hissed, but the dog ignored him. A strange pull urged him forward. He gripped the key tightly as he stepped inside, letting the door drift shut behind him. Silence swallowed him whole. The puppy led him deeper into the house, past the ruins of an old living room, through a narrow hallway where framed photographs hung at crooked angles. Jake caught glimpses of smiling faces, frozen moments of a family that had long since disappeared. Then the puppy stopped. Its tail went still, body tense. Jake followed its gaze to a door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others, newer, as if someone had replaced it recently, and it was locked. His breath caught. The key in his palm seemed to burn. Without thinking, he stepped forward and slid it into the lock. It fit. Jake hesitated. Then, with a slow, deliberate turn, click, the door swung open, and the stench hit him first, thick, sour, the unmistakable scent of something that had been hidden away for far too long. His stomach turned, but his feet moved forward before his brain could stop him. The room was small, windowless, the walls lined with yellowed newspaper clippings, and in the center, a chair. Jake's throat tightened. He could barely process what he was seeing. Ropes still hung from the armrests, frayed but unmistakable. The floor was scarred with deep, uneven scratches, as if something, or someone, had struggled violently. And then, his gaze landed on the far corner. A box. It was old, the wood splintered at the edges, the lid slightly ajar. Something inside shifted, as if disturbed by the air. Jake's entire body screamed at him to leave. But the puppy took a step forward, and growled. A deep, guttural sound that sent ice up Jake's spine. Then, the lid moved, and something inside started to rise. A cold wave of dread washed over Jake as the lid of the box creaked open. His breath hitched, muscles coiled, instincts screaming for him to run, but his feet stayed rooted. The puppy stood beside him, its growl vibrating through the air, eyes locked onto whatever was inside. And then a hand emerged, thin, grayish, fingernails cracked and caked with dirt, trembling as they grasped the edge of the wooden box. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. Every rational thought told him this wasn't possible, but the truth was right in front of him, clawing its way back into the world. A faint, ragged breath came from inside. Then the lid was shoved aside and a figure lurched forward. Jake stumbled back, his body slamming into the wall. His lungs refused to work. The person, if it could even be called that, was barely more than skin and bones, their face hollowed by time and suffering. Dark, sunken eyes flickered toward him, wide with fear, confusion, recognition. Jake knew that face. A ghost from his past. Eli. The name ripped from his throat in disbelief. The figure flinched, blinking sluggishly, their mouth working as if struggling to form words. Jake's mind spiraled. Eli Moser. The boy who vanished 20 years ago. The boy whose disappearance shattered the town, whose name became an unsolved mystery buried beneath rumors and dead-end investigations. And now he was here, buried alive. For 2 decades. Jake dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he reached forward. Eli, it's me. It's Jake. The frail man flinched. His lips parted, but only a cracked, dry wheeze escaped. His gaze darted to the puppy, and something shifted in his expression. A flicker of understanding. Jake swallowed hard. We need to get you out of here. The puppy whined. Urgent. Pressing its tiny body against Eli's leg as if urging him to move. Eli's lips moved again, but this time a whisper slipped out. He's coming. Jake's stomach dropped. Before he could ask who, a creak sounded from the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. Jake's blood ran ice cold. Someone else was here. The puppy snapped its head around, ears pinned back, growl returning in full force. Eli stiffened, his whole body trembling. Then, the hallway light flickered on. A silhouette stood in the doorway. Tall. Unmoving. Jake's breath seized. He recognized that shape, the way the shoulders hunched, the slight tilt of the head. Mr. Moser. The man who had never stopped grieving his lost son. The man who had insisted Eli was taken. The man who... Jake's thoughts snapped into place like jagged glass. Moser had never lost his son. He had hidden him. The truth crashed down with suffocating weight. This house wasn't abandoned. It was a prison. A nightmare wrapped in the illusion of decay. And Moser had come back. To finish what he started. Jake, Eli wheezed, his voice barely audible. Run. But Jake was done running. He pushed to his feet, positioning himself between Eli and the doorway. His heart pounded, adrenaline surging like fire in his veins. Moser stepped forward, his face finally catching the dim light. His expression was eerily calm. Too calm. You shouldn't be here, Jake. His voice was soft, almost gentle. Like he wasn't standing in the middle of his own horror show. You don't understand. Jake's fists clenched. I understand enough. Moser sighed, tilting his head. Then you know you can't leave. The words slithered through the air, thick with finality. Jake braced himself. He didn't know how this would end, but one thing was certain. He wasn't letting Eli stay here another damn second. The puppy let out a sharp bark. And then, Moser lunged. Everything erupted into chaos.